Excuse me. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful opportunity throughout this week, this holy week. We're going to be taking some looks at some things. Hey, I am in the process of preparing a powerful sermon from Easter Sunday morning. Yes, I know we in the church, we like to get happy when we get to end early on Sunday morning. But early on Sunday morning, there was a lot more than just a great opportunity to shout. There was so much going on. And it shows even how great of a promise keeper we have with Jesus. And we are going to, throughout this week, we're going to look at some of the things. One of the things I realize is that sometimes, even though we have the promises of God that gives us our show enough reason to shout, sometimes those things are difficult to be able to live by. And it made me challenge myself on the aspect of what are some things that makes it difficult to stand on the promises of God. Today, our day one here, we're going to look at this concept that's scrolling right down there at the bottom. That one of the reasons may be is that the problem seems to be louder, but we ought to have the assurance that his whisper still speaks peace. We're going to look at this. We're going to see this from this scripture right here as it comes to us. Very familiar passage for some of us. It is in First Kings chapter 19, verse 12. This is how the New International Version reads. He says, after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord, excuse me, after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When I started to think about that, it reminded me um, of a very briefly, a very cute things here. This verse, it truly can show us, first of all, how important it is to depend and wait upon God. That God does not always move in some loud and boisterous way. Sometimes we can hear him in his silence, in some quiet times. This verse serves as a gentle reminder that God is our gentle reassurance and our reminder. Our reminder. God shows up with this still small voice. There's all this stuff going on the outside. But when God chose to whisper unto him, it is something powerful and mighty there. But then not only is he our reassurance and our reminder, but this can remind us that God is near. He is close to us, even when it seems like he is silent. So those are just two things I want us to be able to remember when we think about this, that God often speaks in quiet and in gentle ways that require us to slow down sometimes and just listen. In this moment in Elijah's life, when he's dealing with some deep discouragement and fear, when he is hiding out from danger, it is God uses this moment not to ridicule him, not to rebuke him, but he speaks to him in this very small voice. We can have this encouragement to be able to know that when life's problems is filled with loudness that creates fear, stresses, and even disappointments at times, that we can know that God's voice can still cut through the chaos, but we have to be still and be attentive. And when we think about these things, we can hear catch a couple of things. And with that, what are some things that could make life loud? Maybe it's the noise of bills, broken relationship, bad news, maybe some internal battles that can really shake us up like an earthquake. We often expect God to show up in so big and bold and mighty ways to fix everything in an instance. But sometimes it isn't the booming voice that we are going to hear, but it's the silence that is able to speak through every storm. Sometimes God doesn't come in the fire, he doesn't come in the wind, but he comes in a whisper. And when I started thinking about this, it allowed me to be able to know that even though there was chaos all around him, he was on the run. He was experiencing time of earthquakes and storms. But for God to be able to whisper, that means that God had to be close. That's the only way that I can hear a whisper is if you are in close proximity. So let us take heart in that when it comes down to holding fast to God's promises, that He is always near when our promises are met with problems. And so those are just some key things that I want us to remember on this day, that when the problem is louder, that remember that God speaks through his whisper, and it ought to bring about some peace. Here's a couple things I want you to reflect upon on this day. What noise in your life is drowning out the quiet voice of God? How can you create space to hear his whisper today? And here's another one. Can you trust that even when he is quiet, that God is still working? When I begin to think about some of those things that help me to be able to know, to be able to come to a realization that there are just maybe some key things that we can practice that sometimes we ought to do, just as the Bible has said, to be still and just listen. But then not only that, that we ought not to mistake his silence for his absence. God may be working behind the scenes in ways that we cannot see and we cannot hear just yet. We ought to always be seeking his voice of peace and not panic. Yes, we know problems have a tendency to shout, but God usually whispers. Train yourself on how to hear his whispers, even in the presence of all the noise. That allows me to know that God is not panicked because of our problems. He is still calm and at ease and is able to speak in a still small voice, even in your time of difficulty. I pray that this blesses your soul. Be back with us tomorrow as we will go through and we will see um, another aspect of what God does in the midst of our problems and how his promises is things that we can sure enough hold on to, even in the day and times that we live in. May God bless you and may God keep you. That is my humble prayer for you on today.